You are listening to Metal Girl Solid, one woman's journey through a series she knows nothing about. I'm your host Courtney Colson, and this is Intel Files 2. In this Intel file, we will focus specifically on the Soviet Special Forces unit GRU. GRU stands for Glavnoye Razvedывательное Управление. Okay, that's the best I can do.
Главное разведывательное управление.
Which translates to Main Intelligence Directorate in English. It is the Eastern counterpart to the CIA. We have plenty of information about American intelligence agencies. There are many memoirs by former CIA agents. I've quoted from one such agent, Amaryllis Fox, in this podcast before. Agents from various branches of American intelligence agencies are often portrayed as the heroes in fiction. However, we still have a firm grasp of who they are and how they actually operate in real life. On the eastern side, we have a fair amount of information about other Soviet Spetsnaz Special Forces units, but we know remarkably little about GRU. And of course, when they are depicted in the media, they are always the villain, be it in a James Bond film, a John le Carre novel, or a Hideo Kojima game. For this episode, we will look at the Cold War from the Eastern perspective. As mentioned in the previous Intel file, the United States and Russia used to be allied in World War II. The flip came about due to internal conflict within Russia. A shift in regime meant a shift in political ideologies towards communism. Now, GRU, just vanilla GRU, dates back to World War I, but the Special Forces Division, Spetsnaz GRU, would not be assembled until 1949, and was a key instrument of the Cold War. The term Spetsnaz can get confusing because it literally just translates to Special Forces, so it's an umbrella term that could refer to GRU, or the KGB, or SFB, or MVD, among others. The main branch of GRU, I'm just going to keep calling it Vanilla GRU, had a red star as its logo. You may be aware that the modern Spetsnaz GRU has a Batman logo, but I have been unable to trace back how far that has been in use. It is simply a bat, any resemblance is purely coincidental. Maybe. Spetsnaz GRU was created after Batman, so there's always the possibility they took inspiration. The logo is not the only thing that I have not been able to provide conclusive answers to, and there's a good reason for that. Our sources are incredibly limited. In nearly a century of GRU's existence, we have just three, defectors who lived to tell the tale. The first was Igor Gozenko, who defected to Canada in 1945. And the most recent was Stanislav Lunev in 1992, the year I was born. So not recent. But the one most relevant to us is Viktor Suvorov, a Spetsnaz GRU spy who defected to the United Kingdom in 1979. His real name was Vladimir Rezin, but he publishes all of his books under the Suvorov pen name. He writes both non-fiction and fiction, mostly focused on Soviet and Cold War themes. He is a prolific writer, which is why he is our main, and sometimes only, source on the internal workings of GRU. I must also mention, in 2010 he published a book called Змиеядеца.
Змиеядеца.
In English that would be Snake Eater. This seems to be about a Soviet Special Forces unit hiring a contractor who goes by the name Snake Eater. They want him to train their units, and their training involves torturing and executing prisoners. So nothing to do with our Snake Eater or even Vietnam, but I would be remiss if I did not mention it. Today we will be focusing specifically on Suvorov's best-known work, Aquarium, his memoir of the time he served in the GRU unit. Apparently he served under a man going by the name Lieutenant Snake. Lots of interesting little snake coincidences here. Given that Suvorov is our only source on GRU, and the fact that a lot of the events detailed in his book Aquarium are so shocking, I had to verify if this guy was legit. I managed to dig up this article from the British Telegraph from the year 2008, an obituary for Sir Dick Franks, what a name. He was the chief of MI6. I never knew the difference between MI5 and MI6, so here it is. MI5 is responsible for protecting UK citizens and interests at home, notably against threats to national security. By contrast, MI6, also referred to as the Secret Intelligence Service SIS, is responsible for gathering intelligence outside of the UK in support of the government's foreign and defence policies. And it was MI6 that Suvorov contacted when he defected, which is supported by this article. In November 1966, after 4 years in Bonn, Franks returned to London, and 12 years later was appointed chief. Almost at once, he was confronted with the opportunity to receive a defector, Vladimir Rezin, a GRU officer based in Geneva. A GRU defector was an exceptionally rare commodity. Apart from Grigory Tokayev, as far back as 1946, SIS had not even come close to attracting a line crosser from the GRU, which exercised a strict military discipline over its personnel, and was generally considered virtually impenetrable. Quite apart from Rezin's symbolic value as proof that SIS could attract valuable defectors, he possessed a deep knowledge of the history of the GRU, which he capitalized on during his resettlement in England by releasing a series of books on the subject. Aged 31 and working under United Nations cover, Rezin was smuggled out of the country to England with his wife and 2 young children. A career soldier, he had participated in the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, and later supervised the training of the elite Spetsnaz Special Forces. He had also undertaken missions in Munich, Rome, Basel, Amsterdam, Vienna, and Hamburg. I should correct this article here. It's a little misleading in the way they've worded it. Grigory Tokayev was not a GRU agent, he was a rocket scientist, much like Sokolov. Okay, this Suvorov Rezin guy is legit. Vladimir/Victor is who he claims to be. He will be our primary source of information throughout this episode because, well, we have no other choice. Let's begin our exploration of the Soviet Special Forces with uniforms. Given my history in costume design, it's how I approach every group or culture I research. I think clothing and uniforms tell us a lot about a people. It also gives us a chance to compare the uniforms of the Ocelot unit to the real Soviet uniforms. The Soviet armed forces for a majority of the 19th and 20th centuries wore a gimnasturka, or gymnastic tunic, which is often belted around the waist. This is defined as a smock, a pullover garment with a placket at the center front to be buttoned closed. I will include example photos in these citations, of course, including an amazingly detailed PDF of an illustrated handbook on all the various Soviet uniforms from 1961, compiled by the CIA. This gimnasturka was accompanied by jodhpurs and pull-on leather black jackboots. On these details, at least from the waist down, Ocelot is accurate. Hats include the peaked cap, the side cap, or of course the Ushanka, the famous furry Russian cap, but nowhere do you ever see a beret like the ones the Ocelot unit are wearing. There is also a heavy overcoat worn over all of this, which I don't think we've really seen. I mean, maybe Volgan, he has a long overcoat. I don't know if that one is meant to be the same. But all of this is what the Red Army wore up until the introduction of the OBR 69, aka 73 uniform, in 1969. I don't know why it's called the 73. The Model 69, nice, uniform is more akin to what Ocelot wears, but the Soviet army wore almost entirely drab colours, drab greens, drab browns. Never do you ever see all black uniforms like Ocelot's. It was not up until the 1980s that I was able to find examples of berets and black uniforms well after Snake Eater. But I'm willing to give this a pass, as the Ocelot unit was seemingly Volgan's creation, or perhaps Volgan allowed Ocelot to create his own unit with their own distinct uniforms. From a storytelling perspective, this is also incredibly helpful visually, as the KGB are seen in simple, indistinct, olive-drab field uniforms. Ocelot and his unit stand out in stark contrast in their Nazi-esque uniforms, their dress uniforms basically, officer uniforms. If we were doing simulacra simulation in the Intel files, I'd say the Ocelot uniforms are a top contender. To look at Ocelot and the rest of the unit, to the untrained eye, they seem to look the part. The only odd detail is Ocelot's spurs and cowboy boots, although variants of both can be seen in other uniforms from around the world. I often see British and Australian spurs from World War I at military swap meets, so they don't resemble Ocelot's. Another garment we sometimes see the Ocelot unit wearing is the Telnes Shaka, the iconic striped undershirts. These were inspired by the marina blouse, Breton shirt, worn by French sailors and naval officers of the 19th century. The shirt is worn by various branches of the Soviet armed forces, as well as Duran Duran during the 1980s. We see an internal conflict between the KGB and GRU in Snake Eater, and this is quite accurate to reality. However, this rivalry is not caused by Volgan or any such political upheaval.
Snake, you alright?
I've run into a few snags. These guys were after Sokolov too. Apparently they were taking orders from a GRU colonel named Volgan.
A GRU colonel?
Part of an internal Soviet power struggle, according to Sokolov. Something between the KGB and GRU. Between Khrushchev's supporters and Volgan's.
Sokolov was being guarded by the KGB and hunted by GRU? Snake, it sounds like this could be even hotter than Cuba.
According to Suvorov, something he details numerous times in Aquarium, is the ongoing rivalry between these two agencies. From his perspective, he claims the KGB was often trying to take over the GRU. They seemed threatened by the GRU, where GRU seemed indifferent to the KGB, regarding them as little more than a nuisance. This is how Suvorov introduces the units, and these excerpts will be read out by Phil Dragish.
If you should ever think of making your career in the KGB, simply make your way to any provincial center. There, you will be sure to find a statue of Lenin on the main square. Behind it, there will be just as surely a huge building with a colonnaded facade. That will be the headquarters of the regional committees of the Communist Party. And somewhere close by you, find the regional headquarters of the KGB. Just ask anybody on the square. Anyone will show you. Yes, that grey, gloomy building over there, that one that Lenin is pointing at with his reinforced concrete hand. But you don't necessarily have to apply to the regional headquarters. You can inquire in the special department at your place of work. There too, everybody will help you. Straight along the corridor and then to the right, the door covered in black leather. There are even easier ways of becoming an employee of the KGB. Just apply to the man in charge of the special department. There is one to be found in every god-forsaken railway station and in every factory, sometimes in every workshop. There is one in every regiment, in every college, in every prison, in every party committee, in every design bureau, and masses of them in the communist youth movement, the trade unions, and the special organizations. Just go up to them and say, I want to join the KGB. It's another question whether they'll take you in or not. Of course they will. But the path to the KGB is open for everybody, and there is no need at all to go looking for it. It's by no means so easy to get into the GRU. Who do you apply to? Who do you ask for advice? Which door do you knock at? At the police station, maybe. But the police would only shrug their shoulders. Never heard of it. In Georgia, the police even issue car number plates with the letters GRU, never suspecting that they could have some other less obvious significance. A car with a GRU plate could travel all over the country without causing any surprise and without anyone paying it special attention. For the honest citizen, as for the whole of the Soviet police force, those letters mean nothing and have no special associations. The KGB can count its voluntary workers in millions. The GRU has none. That is the main difference. The GRU is entirely secret. Since nobody knows about it, nobody can enter it on its own initiative. Even supposing that some volunteer were to come along, how would he set about finding the right door to knock at to request admission? Would he be accepted? Not likely. Volunteers are not needed. In fact, a volunteer would be arrested at once and subjected to a long and very painful interrogation. He would have a lot of questions to answer. Where have you heard those 3 letters mentioned? How have you managed to find us? But most important, who helped you? Who? Who? Answer, you bastard! The GRU knows how to get the right answers out of people. They'll get an answer out of anybody, I can guarantee that. They would inevitably discover who helped the volunteer. Then the interrogation would begin all over again. Who talked to you, you skunk, about the GRU? Where did you hear about it?
From everything I have gathered on GRU, especially Spetsnaz GRU, the severity and intensity and secrecy under which they operate is unlike any other special forces or intelligence unit seen anywhere in the world. This is the world in which Kojima suggests Ocelot grew up in. But in terms of appearance, a GRU agent was difficult to distinguish from any other soldier. According to Vlad Besedovsky of Suvorov Publishing, which specializes in books about military uniforms, he claims the Soviet Spetsnaz GRU is usually presented as a legendary unit. It would only make sense if such guys were to wear some very special and cool uniforms. But reality is often disappointing. Apart from having some special pieces of equipment, Soviet Spetsnaz would, in most cases, be wearing almost exactly the same uniforms as everyone else in the Soviet army. Now this is particularly interesting when you contrast it with Suvorov's description of his own uniform within the GRU.
The most important item in the equipment of a Spetsnaz soldier is his footwear. Apart from his parachute, of course. Every boot is the result of thousands of years of experience. Since that was the way our ancestors embarked on campaigns, their feet wrapped in soft leather and tied up in straps. That was the way my boots were made. Soft leather and straps. The pattern of the soles of our boots is copied from the soles of boots worn by the troops of our probable enemies. Depending on what area we are to operate in, we can leave behind us the standard American, French, Spanish, or any other footprints. That is not, however, the main deception. One of the Spetsnaz issue boots or jump boots has the heel at the front and the sole behind. So when a Spetsnaz soldier is going in one direction, his footprints point in the other. The heels are, of course, made thinner and the soles thicker so as to be comfortable on the feet, and the reversal of the heel and sole does not make it difficult to walk. The deception would be revealed almost immediately, of course, were it not that every Spetsnaz soldier has normal boots too. An experienced tracker would probably not be deceived either. He would know that, in vigorous fast walking, the toe leaves a deeper impression than the heel. But do many people look closely at the footprints left by soldiers' feet? Are there many who know that the toe leaves a clearer imprint? And when several feet have trodden in one footprint, it becomes practically impossible to detect whether the heels have made a deeper impression than the toes. On his head, a Spetsnaz soldier wears a helmet. In winter, this is made of fur with a silk lining. In summer, from cotton. It consists of 2 parts, the helmet proper and its mask. The helmet must not leave his head in any circumstances, even in the course of a parachute jump. It must have no clasps, straps, or projections on the outside, because at the time of the jump, it is right next to the parachute. There must be nothing on the helmet to interfere with the opening of the parachute's canopy and cords. Consequently, the helmet worn from a drop is made exactly to the shape of a man's head, covering his head, neck and chin, and leaving exposed only the eyes, nose, and mouth. During operations or when the weather is particularly bad, the mask is pulled down over the eyes, nose, and mouth for the sake of camouflage. The saboteur also wears an outer garment like an anorak, which it is thick, warm, light, and waterproof. In it, you can lie in a marsh without getting wet or sleep in the snow without freezing. It comes down to the middle of the thighs so as not to interfere with walking, and if need be, you could sit for days on a patch of ice as it provides something to sit on. It is very full at the bottom, which is important when running or walking fast. But if necessary, the lower part can be pulled tightly around the legs and so keep the warmth in. The Spetsnaz used to have similar trousers, padded and warm, but that was a mistake. When you have to walk for days on end without stopping, such trousers are a nuisance. They upset the ventilation. Our wise ancestors never wore fur-lined trousers. Instead, they had fur coats reaching down to their heels. And they were right, because fur trousers make you sweat, but a long coat doesn't. We have now learned this lesson. And the Spetsnaz soldier has not only a top coat, but a long skirt covering his body almost down to the heels, which he can attach to it. In this way, he can keep warm, but is never too hot. The skirt is easily unbuttoned and rolled up so that it does not take up much space in the man's kit. In the old days, the top coat was reversible. One side was white, and the other grey and green in patches. But that was also a mistake. The coat had to be soft inside, like a woman's skin, but on the outside it had to be as rough as a rhinoceros hide. That is why the top coats are no longer reversible. They are soft inside and rough on the outside, and they are light grey in color, like last year's grass or dirty snow. It is a very well-chosen color, but in case of great need, a white camouflage smock can be worn over the coat. A Spetsnaz soldier has no need to take a comb with him, because before he jumps, his head is shaved bald, so that his head perspires less and wet hair cannot get into his eyes. As for weapons, there are two possibilities: the full complement or a lightweight issue. The full complement consists of a Kalashnikov automatic AKMS and 300 rounds. Apart from that, he carries on his right calf a huge knife for cutting parachute lines, and on his left calf, 4 square blades. The Spetsnaz knife is no ordinary knife. It has a powerful spring in it, so that when you remove the safety catch and press the release button, the knife blade shoots out with a terrible hiss, forcing the hand holding the empty handle smartly back. If it lands in a tree, it is not always possible to pull it out again, in which case the soldier puts a spare blade into the empty handle, leaning on it with all the weight of his body to compress the powerful spring. He can then put the safety catch on and use the knife again as an ordinary knife, for slicing people, or bread, as a file or as a wire cutter. If a Spetsnaz soldier is carrying the full complement of weapons, he then has his pack in addition to everything else: 6 grenades, some plastic explosives, and directional mines, or some other heavy weapon.
Now that all sounds amazing and impressive, right? We have absolutely no evidence for anything he just said. It is remarkably difficult to verify much of Suvorov's claims, but I think it's worth hearing him out. What is the truth? What is simulation? Victor's version of the facts are all we have to go by. He is uniquely positioned to control the narrative about the GRU. His accounts cannot be contradicted, nor can they be confirmed. There are many details in this book that raise suspicions. There's one scene in which another GRU agent skins a frog alive, and then the frog continues hopping around as if nothing happened. Oh, also Suvorov has this strange paranoia about pigeons. There are just so many times where he goes on this tangent about how much he hates pigeons. Rats with wings. It's also worth mentioning that Suvorov was also the one who proposed the controversial idea that Stalin was planning to attack Nazi Germany in 1941 as a means of waging a proxy war on Europe. If I understand correctly, he is suggesting that Operation Barbarossa was an offensive attack by the Soviets, not a defensive one. This is detailed in Suvorov's book, Icebreaker. So how trustworthy is he? Is he an unreliable narrator? Until, or if, we ever get the evidence to the contrary, Suvorov's version of the truth is the only one we may ever have. Also, side note, the CIA tried those deceptive backwards-facing shoes with the soles facing the other way. It didn't work. How did GRU manage to keep itself so secret? Why was recruitment and defection so difficult? We have multiple accounts of stories, as I said, from former CIA agents. But you're telling me we only have 3 GRU defectors? Well, the opening of Aquarium is a shocking scene that makes it very clear how GRU managed to remain such a mystery. I'm just gonna let this entire opening chapter play out, because it is just fascinating and shocking.
We have a very simple rule. It's a ruble to get in, but 2 to get out. That means that it's difficult to join the organization, but a lot more difficult to get out of it. Theoretically, there is only one way out for any member of the organization: through the chimney or the crematorium. For some, it is an honorable exit, but for others, it is a shameful and terrible way to go. But there is only the one chimney for all of us. That's the only way we can leave this organization. That's the chimney over there. The man with grey hair points towards a huge picture window taking up the whole wall. Have a look at it. At the level of the 9th floor, I have a panoramic view of the vast, unbounded and deserted airfield stretching to the horizon. And if I look straight down, I can see below me a labyrinth of sand-covered pathways running between thick rows of shrubs. The green of the plants in the garden and the burnt-up grass of the airfield are separated by an indestructible concrete wall protected by a thick network of barbed wire. That's it over there. Grey hair points to a fat square chimney, no more than 10 meters high, built on top of a flat asphalt roof. The black roof floats among the greenery of the lilac bushes like a raft in the ocean or an old-fashioned battleship, sitting low in the water with its funnel quite out of proportion. A thin, transparent smoke is rising from the chimney. Is that someone leaving the organization? No, Grey hair laughs. The chimney is not only our way out, it is also a source of energy for us and a guardian of our secrets. At the moment, they are simply burning secret papers. It's better, you know, to burn them than to keep them. When somebody leaves the organization, the smoke is not like this. It is dense and oily. If you join the organization, you too will one day rise into the sky through that chimney. But that's not what we are here for now. The organization is giving you a last chance to change your mind, a final opportunity to consider your choice and to give you something to think about. I'll show you a film. Sit down. He presses a knob on the control panel and sits down in an armchair alongside me. With a faint scraping noise, heavy brown shutters cover the huge windows, and immediately a picture appears on the screen without any title or other explanation. It is a black and white film, obviously old and rather scratched. It has no soundtrack, and the regular clicking noise of the projector can be clearly heard. On the screen, there appears a high, gloomy room without windows. something between a factory workshop and a boiler house. In the foreground, there is a furnace, with fire doors looking like the gates of a small castle, with grooves running into the surface like rails into a tunnel. People in grey protective gowns are standing near the furnace. Boilermen. Then they show the coffin. So this is a crematorium too. Probably the same one I have just been looking at out of the window. The men in gowns lift the coffin and place it on the guide rails. The fire doors open smoothly to each side. The coffin is given a gentle push, and it bears its unknown occupant into the roaring flames. Then the camera gives a close-up of a living person, a face swimming in perspiration. It is probably very hot near the furnace. The face is displayed from all sides for what seems an eternity. At last, the camera pulls back to show the person full length. He is not in a gown. He is dressed in an expensive black suit, terribly crumpled. His tie is tightly screwed around his neck. The man himself is bound fast with steel wire to a stretcher. And the stretcher has been propped up against the wall so that the man can see the furnace. Next, all the attendants suddenly turn their attention to the bound man. Their attention obviously gives him no pleasure. He lets out a scream. A terrible scream. There is no sound, but I can tell it is a scream that would make the windows rattle. 4 of the attendants carefully lower the stretcher to the floor and then raise it again. The bound man makes an incredible effort to prevent this. The titanic strain is apparent in the expression on his face. A vein on his forehead stands out as though it is about to burst. But his effort to bite the hand of an attendant is in vain. His teeth only bite into his own lip, and a black trickle of blood begins to run down his chin. He certainly has sharp teeth. His body is firmly tied down, but it is wriggling about like that of a captured lizard. Submitting to an animal instinct, he begins to beat his head against the wooden handle of the stretcher and so assist his body. He is not fighting for his life, but for an easy death. His calculation is clear. To rock the stretcher over so as to fall with it off the guide rails and onto the concrete floor. This will mean either an easy death or loss of consciousness. You don't fear even the flames if you are unconscious. But the attendants know their job. They simply hold on to the handles of the stretcher to stop it rocking. And the prisoner cannot get at their hands with his teeth even if he breaks his neck. They say that at the last moment of his life a man can perform miracles, prompted by the instinct of self-preservation. All his muscles, all his mental and psychological resources, all his determination to live are suddenly concentrated into one supreme physical effort to survive. The man is making that last effort. He strains his whole body to try to get free. He sits like a fox which, caught in a trap, bites and tears off its own bloody paw. Even the metal guide rails begin to shake. He strains to the point of breaking his own bones and tearing his own tendons and muscles. It is a superhuman effort. But the wire does not give, and the stretcher slides smoothly along the rails. The furnace doors move aside again, and the fire casts a white light on the soles of the man's dirty patent leather shoes. He tries to bend his knees in an effort to increase the distance between his feet and the roaring fires, but he can't. The cameraman then shows the man's fingers in close-up. The wire has bitten deeply into them, but the tips of his fingers are free, and with them too he is trying to slow down the movement towards the fire. His fingertips are spread out and tensed. If they could only come up against something, the man would certainly hold on. Then suddenly, the stretcher comes to a halt at the furnace itself. A new figure appears on the screen, dressed in a gown, like the other attendants, and gives them a signal with his hand. The attendants obediently remove the stretcher from the guide rails and stand it again on its handles against the wall. What is wrong? Why the hold-up? It soon becomes clear. Another coffin is wheeled into the crematorium on a low trolley. It is already nailed down and very elegant with a decorative fringe. It is the coffin of some highly esteemed person. Make way for it! The attendants lift it on to the guide rails and send it off on its last journey. Then there is an unbelievably long wait while it is consumed by the flames. At last, it is the turn of the man bound to the stretcher, which is again placed on the rails, and once again I hear that silent scream which is probably enough to lift the furnace doors off their hinges. I study the man's face in the hope of finding there signs of madness. It's easier for madmen in this world, but there are no such signs on that handsome manly face. It is not distorted by the imprint of madness. It is simply that he doesn't want to go into the furnace and is trying somehow to make that clear. But what can he do except scream? So he screams. Fortunately, that scream is not recorded for posterity. Then his patent leather shoes go into the fire, and that is that. The fire flares up, oxygen being pumped in, no doubt. The two attendants at the front jump away to the side, while the two at the end give the stretcher a good push into the depths of the furnace. The furnace doors close, and the sound of the projector dies out. Who was he? I don't really know why I ask such a question. He was a colonel, a former colonel. He worked in our organization in important posts. But he deceived us, so he was turned out of the organization, and he left. That's the law here. We don't force anybody to come into the organization. But if you don't want to join, you can simply refuse. But once you've joined, you belong to the organization lock, stock, and barrel. Along with your shoes and your tie. So there you are. I am giving you a last opportunity to change your mind. A minute to reflect. But I don't need a minute for reflection. That's the rule. Even if you don't need that minute, the organization is obliged to let you have it. So, sit down and keep quiet. Grey hair presses a switch and a long thin hand begins to move round the bright face of the clock. Once again I can see before me the colonel's face at the very last moment when his feet are already in the fire. But his head is still living, blood is still circulating, and his eyes still reflect the powerful intellect, the fear of death, the cruel torture of an unconquerable desire to live. If they are going to admit me into that organization, I am ready to serve it loyally. It is a serious and powerful organization, and I like their ways. But I know damned well in advance that if I am to depart through that short square chimney, it will never be in a coffin with fancy frills. That is not my character. I am not the sort to get fancy treatment. Not me. Time's up. Do you want more time to think? No. Another minute? No. All right then, Captain. I have the honor to be the first to congratulate you on joining our secret brotherhood, known as the Chief Directorate of Intelligence of the General Staff, or the GRU for short.
Is this the kind of world Ocelot grew up in? We know almost nothing, simply that he was born in 1944 during the Battle of Normandy, to the joy and the sorrow. He was raised by Volgan, and by extension the GRU, according to the game guide at least. He worked for the NSA before defecting to the Soviet Union, quote-unquote defecting. In reality, the story seems to indicate that he was raised in the Soviet Union before entering the NSA as a spy, then pretending to defect to Russia. He shares a lot in common with Eva in this regard. She claims she was born in Idaho, but for some reason was recruited by the philosophers as a child and enrolled in one of their charm schools, a joint US-Chinese-Soviet facility for training their spies. Ocelot may likely have undergone similar training. From what little we can glean from Ocelot's childhood, and from the real-world GRU unit, Ocelot's personality and behaviours as an adult make a lot of sense. He may have a distinct personality, too flamboyant to be acceptable to the GRU, who train their spies, and I quote, to be as unremarkable and grey as the asphalt he walks on. But I think that stems from it being all he has. His inner world is all he has for consistency, not family, not the structures around him. He must be a nomad, a chameleon. But he affords himself small indulgences, most notably his love of westerns, his very visible love of westerns. His manner of dress is a tiny rebellion, a tiny mark showing the world that there is someone real under the masks.
Look like a clown in that stupid jacket.
This is a snakeskin jacket. And for me, it's a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom.
We don't get much of a sense whether Ocelot regards himself as being on the right side with the Soviets. From what I've gathered from what little I know of Ocelot so far in this continuity, Ocelot is on no one's side but his own. He served the Soviets because it served him. But after he meets Big Boss, his allegiances shift. His later allegiances to Kazuhira and Venom Snake do not stem from any real personal connection to those men. He is there simply to fulfill the role that Big Boss has asked of him. Kazuhira was right not to trust Ocelot at all. As far as I can tell, Big Boss is the only person Ocelot chooses to follow because he genuinely respects the man. There is no ulterior motive, at least not yet. But we know Ocelot has some integrity. He was horrified when Volgan launched a nuke at the lab.
Colonel, even if they are our enemies, they're still our countrymen.
Ocelot makes no comment on the activities of the United States, but Russia as a whole felt threatened by the US and its growing military nuclear power. Ocelot is working to give Volgan comparable nuclear power. This seems to run contradictory to his feelings towards the nuking of that research facility. And then in MGSV, Ocelot disapproves of the actions of both sides during the Cold War. Under Volgan, maybe Ocelot was simply saying and doing whatever was needed in order to survive. He was just 20 years old, spending the majority of his life in the Soviet military. By the 1960s, the cracks were definitely showing in the communist regime. Did Ocelot notice them, or turn a blind eye because it suited him? Revolver Ocelot is as unknowable as the GRU agency he worked for. So, this is the best I could do, to provide you with what little evidence we have on both of them.